The world as I knew it is gone. The sky, once a tranquil blue, has become a permanent bruise of red and orange, a violent reminder of a sun that burns hotter and harsher than memory allows. Clouds are scarce, broken into streaks of ash carried on winds that whip across landscapes stripped bare. Dust hangs thick in the air, settling into every crevice, every crack in the earth, every crease in a survivor's face. The taste of iron lingers on the tongue. The scent of smoke and decay saturates the atmosphere. Breathing itself has become labor, each inhalation a cautious negotiation with a hostile sky. Cities lie in ruin. Skyscrapers stand like hollowed out teeth, their glass facades shattered, steel skeletons exposed to the relentless sun. Roads are fractured ribbons of asphalt, split by deep fissures that swallow vehicles whole. The once bustling streets are now corridors of silence, punctuated only by the occasional howl of a desperate animal or the distant roar of a dust storm approaching from the plains. Parks and squares have turned to wastelands, weeds breaking through cracked concrete, nature reclaiming spaces humans abandoned or destroyed. Bridges collapse into rivers that barely flow, carrying with them the memory of commerce and connection. Rivers themselves are cruel reminders of what has been lost. The Missouri, once a lifeline, now gapes as a choked, cracked trench, mud caking the banks. Lakes evaporate under merciless heat, leaving salt flats where water once shimmered. Aquifers that once promised subterranean salvation are now depleted, and wells have gone dry, leaving communities to fight over the smallest, murkiest puddles. When storms do come, they are violent and unpredictable, ripping through the landscape with rain so acidic it sears the skin and uproots what little vegetation remains. Forests are skeletons. Fires have swept across them year after year, leaving nothing but blackened trunks and ash that rises in ghostly clouds. The wind spreads the remnants far and wide, coating towns and cities in a blanket of grey that never fully settles, because it is always disturbed, always shifting. Mountains are no longer landmarks of stability. Avalanches of dust, rock slides, and fire scars carve jagged scars into their faces, making navigation treacherous and every journey a gamble with death. Civilization has fractured. Governments exist only as stories told by those who survived the first waves of collapse. Survivor groups form and dissolve with shocking speed, often based on the temporary distribution of water or food. Some are cooperative, sharing what little they have. Others are violent, preying on the weak or unlucky. Scavengers roam the wastelands, moving silently, taking what they need without question, leaving a trail of fear in their wake. Institutions, like hospitals, schools, and police stations, are empty shells, some burned, some picked clean, all reminders of the world that once was. Electricity is a memory. Solar panels cracked and charred by heat, wind turbines toppled by storms, and generators running on scavenged fuel are all that remain to supply sporadic energy. Radios like mine are fragile lifelines, carrying voices across the wasteland. Thread, connecting isolated humans who refuse to vanish into the silence. Markets, commerce, communication. Everything has retreated to barter and rumor, to whispered warnings and cautious alliances. The environment itself has become both predator and adversary. The wind carries the sting of sand that cuts skin like razors. Nights are cold enough to seep into bones despite the relentless sun of the day. Storms arrive without warning, twisting buildings into ruins, flooding streets with water that poisons as it touches the land. And yet, life stubbornly persists in hidden pockets. Rats, birds, tenacious plants that somehow root in cracked asphalt, small creatures adapted to the extremes. These survivors are my only constant reminder that life does not surrender easily. There is a tension to the world now, an unrelenting anxiety that seeps into every step. You never know if the next turn will lead to a puddle of tainted water, a band of desperate humans, or a dust storm that will erase everything in seconds. Every horizon is uncertain, Shadows move differently here, stretched and distorted by the harsh sun or swallowed entirely by the smog-filled air. Even familiar landmarks feel alien, warped by destruction and neglect. A cruel reminder that memory cannot save you. And yet, in this fractured land, there are whispers of hope. Ruins sometimes hide fresh water. Cracked streets can conceal fruit-bearing trees that survived the heat. Some survivors, stubborn and clever, endure. But every promise is shadowed by uncertainty. The world is merciless, and the path ahead is littered with danger. Anxiety is constant, a companion to every cautious breath, every step over debris, every rationed sip of water. Survival is a negotiation with the earth itself, a fragile balance between hope and despair, and the horizon offers no guarantees, only the relentless test of endurance. I am the voice you hear over the static, the one who talks into the night because the night listens, even if no one else does. I am not a hero, not in the sense of someone who charges into the fray to save the world. I am a survivor, and survival has become its own art form, its own cruel science. My name, well, it used to matter. Now, names are fragile things like paper in the wind. But for clarity, call me Ezra. It fits the rhythm of a world that no longer fits. I remember a different life. Houses with walls, not just tarps and scavenged sheets. Streets with people, not with ghosts and predators. Family dinners, arguments over trivialities, laughter carried on spring air. I had responsibilities, dreams, a city that felt permanent. Now, permanence is a memory, a lie we tell ourselves when sleep comes too heavy and dreams too sharp. I survive in ways that are both mundane and extraordinary. My days are measured by scavenging trips, by monitoring water levels in distant creeks, by checking the filtration system I cobbled together from old metal pipes and coffee filters. I ration everything: food, water, even energy. The generator that keeps the radio humming runs on scavenged fuel, each drop precious. Every battery is counted, every spark of electricity a lifeline. I walk the wastelands with caution. Streets are traps, cities are jungles, and humans are as dangerous as the environment. Raiders strike without warning. Desperate scavengers betray at the slightest provocation. I've learned to read the signs. A broken bottle in the street, footprints that lead nowhere, the distant rumble of engines. Every sound, every shadow is a question I must answer before it answers me. Water is life. I know every pond, every puddle that might still hold it. I know the look of rainwater before it turns acidic, the smell of a creek that's safe versus one that will poison if swallowed. Food is even harder. I forage what I can, but most of what remains is bitter, shriveled, half dead. I've learned to recognize edible plants, roots, even insects when necessary. I keep traps for small animals, careful not to overhunt, careful to respect what scraps of the old balance remain. Yet survival alone is not enough. I broadcast because someone has to, because listening is a thread connecting isolated minds. Every voice on the other end, alive, uncertain, clinging, is a reminder that I am not entirely alone. Hope is fragile, and yet I cultivate it in the airwaves. I speak into a microphone salvaged from a radio station, long abandoned, sending reports on weather, on danger, on whispers of life elsewhere. Sometimes it is just static. Sometimes someone responds. Each reply is a victory. Each acknowledgement that someone, somewhere, is out there, breathing, thinking, surviving, keeps me from surrendering entirely. I have lost more than I can count. Family, friends, neighbors, names fade, faces blur. Some were swallowed by the drought, some by fire, some by storms that tore towns apart. Each loss carved a hollow in me, a space that cannot be filled. I remember my sister's laugh, the way it bounced across our old apartment, and it feels like another world. My parents, gone within weeks of each other, when disease spread through, a refugee camp we had tried to avoid. Every memory is a double-edged sword, warmth, but also a reminder of what was stolen. Nightmares follow me. Not the ordinary kind, but echoes of what I've seen. Towns burning under unnatural winds, bodies left in the streets, the twisted faces of those desperate enough to kill for a loaf of bread. I wake in the middle of the night sometimes, heart hammering, muscles tense, only to realize the nightmare is not in a dream. It is reality, a constant presence outside the walls I've built for myself. Still, I carry on. What drives me is not just survival, it is responsibility. There are others, scattered like stars, who may be counting on the voice that comes through the radio. If I fall silent, even for a day, it may mean someone walks into danger without warning, someone dies without a word. That responsibility is heavier than any pack of supplies I can carry, heavier than hunger or fatigue, heavier than fear. It is the anchor that keeps me moving forward when the world itself threatens to drag me under. I cling to rituals, as absurd as they may seem, because they are proof that I am human. I mark days by the sun's trajectory, by the rationing of water, by checking the generator's oil and fuel. I write messages on scraps of paper, sometimes leaving them in hidden places, imagining that someone might find them and know I existed. I catalogue plants and animals, monitor weather patterns, and keep a journal of what the land whispers to me. These are small acts, but they are defiance against the chaos. They remind me that despite everything, I am still capable of thought, of purpose, of creating meaning. Trust is a dangerous commodity. I have been betrayed by those who seemed allies. I have watched communities fracture under pressure. Friends turn on friends, desperation overriding loyalty. Yet, I also see moments of humanity, people sharing water, a scavenger offering a handful of dried fruit, a stranger warning me of a storm's approach. These moments are rare, but they are precious. They are the proof that not all is lost, that some fragments of humanity endure. I remember the first dust storm I survived alone. It came like a wall of darkness, swallowing the horizon in seconds. The wind tore through the skeletons of cities, stripping paint, flinging debris, and filling lungs with grit. I huddled in the remains of a collapsed gas station, listening to the world howl around me. When it passed, the landscape had changed. The world had been rewritten, and yet I survived. That memory, seared into me, is a constant reminder. Even when everything seems obliterated, resilience can endure. My life is a ledger of endurance. Each day counted, each small victory, finding a liter of clean water, avoiding raiders, keeping the generator alive, is a triumph. The world may have fallen apart, but I have learned to navigate the wreckage, to read the signals, to survive. And in that survival, I find purpose. Not glory, not comfort, not certainty. Purpose. I speak to you not because I am hopeful in the traditional sense. Hope is fragile here. I speak because we are still alive, and that is in itself a defiance, because someone may be listening, somewhere, clinging to the sound of another human voice as a tether to life, because tomorrow may be worse, but today is enough to matter. My name is Ezra. I survive. I endure. And as long as I can speak into the radio, I exist. And in that existence, perhaps, so does hope. This section is crafted to immerse readers in Ezra's internal world, survival routines, personal losses, and the faint glimmers of hope that keep them going, while maintaining a reflective, gritty tone. The crisis has been creeping for years, silent and insidious, like a disease slowly, eating away at the body of the world. But now it is undeniable. The drought has stretched its fingers into every valley, every town, every riverbed that once carried life. Streams that laughed over rocks in spring have turned to mud and cracked soil. Lakes have evaporated, leaving mirrors of salt and dust that reflect nothing but the sky's harsh, burnt orange. The Missouri River, a lifeline in the old days, gapes open as a hollow trench of baked clay, a reminder that even the grandest of lifelines can fail. For 3 years, the sky has not released. A single drop of mercy. Clouds, when they appear, are scorched and brittle, more smoke than water, drifting in slow defiance of their purpose. Temperatures climb to levels no human was meant to endure. The air itself is a weapon, heavy with heat and acrid dust, infiltrating lungs, corroding skin. Nights provide no relief. Scorched earth radiates heat long after the sun has dipped below, the jagged horizon. Every day is a test of endurance. Every hour a negotiation with the environment that has turned against us. The world outside my shelter is no longer predictable. Dust storms arrive with sudden violence. Walls of grit that strip metal, shred fabric, and fill lungs with particles that scar internally. One misstep can leave a person incapacitated or dead before the storm passes. Fires rage across forests, fueled by tinder-dry vegetation and carried by winds that never rest. Smoke stretches for miles, blotting out the sun, choking the life from anyone who has not found refuge. Even when there is no immediate disaster, the lingering effects of months without rain, without proper food, without energy, are just as lethal. Malnutrition is everywhere, and the human body, once resilient, has begun to fail under stress. Encounters with other survivors are increasingly tense. Trust has become a dangerous currency. Some groups, desperate and organized, roam the wastelands like predators. They ambush, steal, and kill without hesitation, seeking fuel, water, and food that they cannot generate themselves. Other survivors cling to the remnants of their humanity, sharing rations or warning of dangers ahead. But even they are wary, constantly scanning for signs of betrayal. In this world, a smile can hide a knife, and a friendly gesture can mask desperation. I have learned to approach every interaction with caution, to measure body language, to listen to the rhythms of speech, to calculate risk. Today, I witnessed one such encounter. A small band of scavengers crossed my path along the cracked riverbed. At first glance, they appeared cooperative, offering a half-empty water container in exchange for some dried beans I had been saving. But my instincts warned me. One misstep, one lapse in vigilance, and I would be a mark. I nodded politely, traded the ration, and walked away with my pack heavier than I liked, my mind racing through possible ambushes for the next few miles. Every encounter leaves a residue of anxiety, a reminder that survival is not just about weathering storms, but outthinking other humans. Resources are vanishing faster than I can track them. Water is scarce, even in areas that once seemed reliable. Wells have gone dry or become contaminated. Rivers, when they do flow, are laden with pollutants, chemical runoff, and sediments that make consumption dangerous without careful filtration. I carry a portable filtration system, but even it has limits. Filters clog, fuel for boiling is limited, and every container must be weighed carefully. Food is equally tenuous. Cans of preserved goods are few, traps yield inconsistent results, and the plants that survive the heat are bitter, small, or toxic unless treated correctly. Energy, once abundant and invisible, is now rationed to the hum of my generator and the flicker of a single battery-powered lamp. Each watt is precious. Each spark could mean the difference between life and death, warmth and exposure. Science, once a theoretical pursuit, has become a lifeline. I record temperatures, measure soil moisture, and track storm systems as best I can. The patterns are brutal. Heat waves now extend into what used to be the cooler months, followed by violent storms that strip vegetation and erode soil. The jet stream, warped by melting polar ice, pushes weather anomalies across regions in ways that defy prior understanding. Even the simplest weather forecast is now a guide, not a certainty. Lightning strikes forests parched beyond recognition, igniting fires that sweep with the speed of predators, and dust devils carve the streets into miniature tornadoes of grit and debris. These are the mechanics of the disaster, and knowledge of them is as vital as any weapon or ration. The limitations are constant and unforgiving. Fuel is nearly impossible to find, scavenged from abandoned vehicles or forgotten industrial sites. Each litre burned is a calculated risk. It powers the generator, which keeps the radio alive, which keeps the lines of communication open, but it also diminishes the supplies that could transport me or defend me. Every choice is a trade-off. Every decision can tip the balance between life and death. I have learned to improvise. Water can be extracted from roots or dew collected on scavenged plastic sheets. Food can be augmented with insects, small animals, or edible weeds, though it requires caution and preparation. Fires, though risky, provide warmth and the ability to cook, sterilize, and signal. I document every method meticulously, knowing that knowledge, like food and water, must be conserved. Yet survival is not just about sustaining the body. It is about sustaining the mind. Isolation gnaws at me. The silence is a predator. It magnifies every fear, every memory of those who are gone. The wind carries whispers that are not always imagined. Footsteps on rubble, voices in distant ruins, the sound of movement where nothing should be. The mind begins to play tricks. But imagination is also a tool, a mechanism for planning, for testing scenarios, for staying alive when the body wants to rest. The social dynamics of other survivors compound the crisis. Groups form temporary alliances, only to collapse under scarcity. Desperation makes morality fluid. Those who once valued life now calculate it purely in terms of utility. Fuel, water, manpower. Betrayal is frequent. Cooperation, when found, is tentative. In one town I passed through, a small community had barricaded themselves behind walls of scrap metal. They had water, but it was fiercely guarded. Negotiation meant risking exposure. Stealing it would mean death. I chose to leave without confrontation, walking away with only knowledge of their location. Information is as valuable as any resource. The environment amplifies human conflict. Fires drive people from rural areas into urban ruins, where the struggle for survival intensifies. Dust storms sweep through settlements, destroying supplies and scattering populations. Toxic rain contaminates reservoirs, forcing reliance on contaminated rivers. Every meteorological event compounds scarcity, and every human encounter becomes more dangerous because desperation feeds aggression. Survival is becoming harder each day, not just because of weather or scarcity, but because of adaptation, both, mine and that of others. Predators, human and otherwise, are becoming cleverer, hungrier, and more willing to exploit weakness. Resources are finite, and every mile traveled carries a calculus of risk versus reward. One misstep can erase weeks of careful planning. The landscape is no longer passive. It actively resists, punishes, and tests every choice. In the end, the crisis is both immediate and existential. I fight for the next meal, the next liter of water, the next sunrise. But I also fight to remember what it is like to exist in more than just survival mode. Knowledge, vigilance, and caution are my armor. Hope, fragile as it may be, is my only weapon. And as the sun scorches another day into the dust, I prepare for the next storm, the next encounter, the next test of endurance. Each day survived is a minor victory, each ration carefully managed a triumph, each step forward a rebellion against the relentless collapse. The world is breaking faster than it heals. Every decision is urgent. Every horizon carries threat. And yet, even in this tension, there is a stubborn persistence, the chance, however slim, that survival is not just endurance, but the beginning of something that might endure beyond the drought, beyond the storms, beyond the shadows. This section fully introduces the climate crisis, human threats, scarcity of resources, and the scientific and survival knowledge the protagonist uses, all in a tense, reflective first-person perspective. The days stretch longer now, each one heavier than the last, weighted by the unrelenting sun and the gnawing certainty that the world is moving faster than I can keep up. Supplies are dwindling. My water ration, once calculated to last a week, is now a 2-day negotiation with my own body. The taste of dust in every sip reminds me that purity is a luxury I can no longer afford. Cans of food are fewer with each scavenging trip, and the wild edibles I rely on are sparse, often bitter, sometimes poisonous if not prepared with precision. Every mouthful is a gamble, every step outside my shelter a risk. The generator hums. In the corner, a lifeline that requires constant vigilance. Fuel runs low, and the nearest sources are hundreds of miles away, through landscapes that have become hostile territories. The hum is comforting and mocking at the same time. It reminds me that I am still alive, but also that survival is tethered to fragile, finite resources that could vanish overnight. Electricity is not just convenience, it is communication, it is knowledge, it is connection, and yet it is also a reminder of my isolation. The world is restless. Dust storms now arrive. With the precision of predators, one day I watched from a ridge as a wall of dust and grit, taller than any building, moved across the plains, swallowing trees, cars, and the remnants of houses in a suffocating cloud. I ducked into a hollowed-out bus, pressing my face against a makeshift mask, feeling the particles scrape my skin like sandpaper. I survived, but my arms were cut and my eyes raw for days afterward. Nature does not forgive. Nature does not negotiate. Nature takes. Human threats have escalated alongside the environmental ones. Raiders, once sporadic, are now organized, moving, in bands across the wastelands, with vehicles they've scavenged and repaired, weapons they fashioned from the detritus of civilization. I've seen towns emptied overnight, water stolen, buildings set ablaze. There is no rhyme or reason to their cruelty, only the logic of survival at any cost. I have learned to watch, to listen, to calculate, approaching settlements with suspicion, reading footprints, estimating numbers, noting patterns of behavior. One wrong move and weeks of careful planning could be erased in seconds. In the midst of this chaos, I heard a whisper, a rumor as fragile as the dust on the wind. Survivors spoke of a place north of here, hidden beyond the burned forests and cracked plains where water flows freely and the earth still bears fruit. Some called it a sanctuary, others a myth, a story to give people hope when hope is a currency no one can afford. I do not know if it exists. I have learned to treat every story with caution, yet the thought of it pulls me forward, a beacon in a world otherwise defined by decay and loss. Could it be real? Or is it just another trap, another cruel trick, played by desperate humans or my own mind? I ration my steps carefully, moving at dawn and dusk when the sun is least merciless. My body is exhausted, muscles aching from travel over cracked earth and through debris-littered streets. Hunger is constant. The stomach becomes a mental battleground. I've trained myself to ignore it for periods, to focus on the tasks at hand, but it never fully disappears. Every scavenging trip is a calculation. How far I can go, what I can carry, what I might encounter along the way. On one such trip, I encountered a group of survivors, a family, if their interactions are to be believed, huddled in the ruins of a collapsed gas station. Their eyes were wide with fear and caution. They had water, a small container, enough to last them a few days, but they were unwilling to share. I understood. Survival teaches lessons in selfishness quickly. I approached cautiously, offering knowledge in exchange. I had found a small grove of edible roots beyond the ridge, and I offered their location. They considered me for what felt like hours, and then, finally, nodded. I left carrying only the knowledge that they survived, but not much more. Trust is always provisional. The more I move, the more I realize that every corner of the world carries its own threats. Wild animals, emboldened by the lack of human interference and the scarcity of prey, roam in packs. Coyotes, wolves, even larger predators, sometimes mutated in their own ways, stalk paths I would have considered safe months ago. I have seen the remains of a scavenger torn apart, not by humans, but by nature itself. A stark reminder that survival is a negotiation with every living force around me. Resource scarcity gnaws at every decision. Fuel, water, food, electricity. They are the lifeblood of survival. I calculate consumption with military precision. 1 liter of fuel moves the generator for a day. 1 liter of water can last me for 24 hours. 1 meal sustains me just long enough to forage for the next. Every decision is a balance of risk and necessity. I keep detailed notes, maps, and reminders because memory alone cannot guide me in a world that is constantly shifting. The mystery of the rumored sanctuary gnaws at me. At night, I stare into the orange haze outside my shelter, imagining what might await. A river running clear, trees heavy with fruit, survivors who have learned to rebuild, to thrive despite the collapse. Could it exist? Or is it a cruel fantasy, a product of longing too desperate to be denied? I weigh every rumor, every whispered word, but uncertainty is a constant companion. And yet hope, even the faintest flicker, is intoxicating in a world otherwise defined by despair. I have begun broadcasting differently, weaving questions into my radio reports, listening for responses that might confirm or deny the rumor. Every static-filled crackle, every faint voice, carries information that could be vital. Names, locations, directions, even stories of other survivors. They are threads I follow cautiously, knowing that misinformation is as dangerous as no information at all. The line between reality and myth is thin, but I cannot afford to ignore even the smallest possibility. Internal struggle is a constant shadow. Can I trust anyone? Every encounter teaches me caution, yet the thought of the sanctuary lures me toward cooperation. If it is real, I may need allies to reach it safely. But allies bring risk. Allies can betray, can make mistakes, can draw attention from predators both human and environmental. My mind cycles through scenarios endlessly. Who to trust, who to avoid, what risks to take. The tension is exhausting, yet exhilarating in the way that only survival can make life feel alive. Days pass in a rhythm dictated by scarcity and danger. I forage, I ration, I listen. Nights are filled with reflection and planning, cataloguing resources, noting environmental patterns, and preparing for the next day. I track storm systems, monitor soil moisture, and record water sources. Knowledge is survival, and I cling to it as tightly as I cling to hope. The tension escalates when a small fire breaks out nearby, sweeping across the cracked plains toward a ruined settlement. I watch from a ridge as smoke twists into the sky, black against the burnt orange. The wind is unpredictable. I calculate the fire's path, knowing that water is insufficient to stop it, that shelter is temporary, and that speed is the only reliable protection. Every instinct honed over months, every observation of weather comes into play. I move quickly, avoiding both the blaze and the scavengers drawn to it. Nature and humanity converge in chaos, and survival is determined by calculation and luck. The sanctuary remains a mystery, but the pursuit of it drives every choice. The world is broken, each day more hostile than the last. Yet this possibility, however tenuous, keeps me moving. It is a thread that connects me to a purpose larger than mere endurance, a glimmer that perhaps survival is not enough. Perhaps there is something worth striving for, a place where humanity can breathe and hope can grow, however fragile. I move cautiously, carrying the weight of scarcity, the threat of predators, the need for vigilance, and the fragility of hope. Every step is calculated, every encounter observed, every ration measured, and yet the thought of the sanctuary pushes me forward, a fragile flame in a world otherwise swallowed by dust, fire, and despair. The rising action of my life is not defined by adventure or triumph. It is defined by endurance, tension, and the small, precarious glimmers of possibility that keep me human in a world that has forgotten what humanity means. Each day, the world tests me more brutally. Dust storms grow larger, fires more unpredictable, raiders bolder. Yet the sanctuary rumor continues to whisper in the static of my radio. in the cracked and scorched landscape, in the faint pulse of hope that refuses to die. I do not know if it is real. I do not know if it is safe, but the idea of it propels me forward, even as exhaustion gnaws at my muscles, hunger claws at my stomach, and the weight of isolation presses against my chest. Survival alone is no longer enough. The rising action of my existence is defined not just by endurance, but by pursuit, by the possibility that the world can still offer more than mere survival. And so I continue, moving forward through dust and fire, through betrayal and uncertainty, driven by the faint, fragile hope that somewhere, beyond the horizon, the earth still bears life, and that life is worth finding. This section heightens the tension. Escalating environmental threats, resource scarcity, human danger, and the introduction of a mysterious sanctuary as a potential hope, all while highlighting Ezra's internal struggle with trust and hope. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a hint of moisture that I hadn't felt in years, and with it came a whisper of something I hadn't dared hope for. A river, a hidden place, a sanctuary. For weeks I had followed fragments of rumor, whispers over the static, scraps of maps sketched on scraps of paper, and each one had led to nothing. But now the air smelled different, damp in a way that burned with the memory of rain. My heart, long dulled to the rhythms of survival, began to race. Could it be real? Could the earth, in its cruelty, have preserved a corner untouched by fire and dust? I moved cautiously, every step measured, every shadow observed. The land here was treacherous. Fissures split the ground like open wounds, and jagged steel and concrete littered the remnants of a highway, torn apart by storms and human neglect. My legs ached from days of travel, my stomach protested with emptiness, and my throat was raw from breathing the fine dust that clung to every surface. Yet I pressed on, driven by a hope so fragile it could be crushed by a single misstep. It wasn't long before the first real threat appeared. Raiders, a band I had spotted days earlier from a distance, had tracked the same whispers, and now their vehicles churned the dust behind me. I could hear engines, low and hungry, a sound that set my nerves on fire. I ducked behind the wreck of a bus, the metal twisted and sharp, a temporary shield against their gaze. They were armed and ruthless, their shadows long in the late afternoon sun. I had choices: stay hidden and hope they pass, or risk confrontation in a desperate attempt to escape. Every second weighed on me. The choice was stark, and the calculus simple. Survival demanded movement, and yet every step carried danger. I waited, heart hammering, listening to their conversations, strained through the dust. They were looking for water, like all of us, and I knew the trail I followed could lead them straight to me. Timing became everything. When the wind shifted, again I seized it, moving silently across fractured asphalt, using the terrain to obscure my passage. Each step was a negotiation with fate. After what felt like hours, I found myself on the edge of a canyon, one I had passed only in rumor, its walls jagged, the shadows deep, and there, at the bottom, I saw it, a pool of water, shimmering in the fading light, surrounded by green unlike anything I had seen in years. Trees, small but alive, leaned over the edge, roots digging into moist soil. It was real. The sanctuary existed. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe freely, to imagine relief, to taste water without rationing it. But the moment was fleeting. The reality of the situation reasserted itself with brutal clarity. The canyon was not without its dangers. To reach the water, I had to descend a sheer incline, loose rocks threatening to give way beneath my weight. One slip could be fatal. My muscles screamed, my fingers tore against the rock, and each step required the full concentration of my exhausted body. I reminded myself, hesitation would cost more than pain. Each movement was deliberate, a meditation in survival, until finally I reached the bottom. The water was colder than I remembered rivers could be. pure and almost alive in its clarity. I knelt beside it, cupping my hands to drink, tasting a relief so deep it felt like an impossible luxury. I drank, until my body shivered, and yet I knew I could not linger. Raiders were still above me, still hunting. I filled a small container, careful to conserve enough for the journey ahead, and scanned the shadows, alert to every sound. Then came the moment of reckoning. A dust storm, sudden and violent, rolled over the canyon rim, faster than anything I had ever experienced. The wind screamed, carrying debris, sand, and the stench of burned earth. Trees bent like they would snap. The river's surface churned into froth, and I realized that the very sanctuary I had discovered could also be my tomb. I had a choice: stay and risk being trapped, possibly buried alive, or climb back into the storm, moving blind but with a chance to survive. Instinct took over. I began the ascent, gripping roots, rocks, anything that could support my weight. The storm assaulted me from every direction. My vision blurred with grit, my lungs burned, and my muscles trembled with exhaustion. At one point, I lost my footing, tumbling down a few feet, scraping my arms and legs. Pain was immediate, sharp, and distracting, but survival demanded focus. I forced myself to continue, counting each movement, each handhold, each foothold. Above me, the raiders had been caught by the storm, their vehicles spinning and sliding on loose earth, engines screaming into the wind. They were slowed, but not incapacitated. I knew if I lingered, they would find me, and yet the river, the sanctuary, the life it represented, was behind me. To survive, I needed both distance and perspective, a way to preserve what I had discovered without losing myself to the storm or to human predators. As I climbed, my mind raced through memories of everything that had brought me here: the dust-choked streets, the abandoned towns, the scarcity of water, the isolation, the radio broadcasts that were my only tether to humanity. Each memory was a thread, weaving together the story of my endurance. And yet, the sanctuary demanded that I make a choice beyond endurance. It demanded courage. Could I risk everything I had, including my own life, to secure a place of safety and potential renewal? The canyon rim loomed above, the sky turning from burnt orange to grey as the storm engulfed everything. I reached the top, chest heaving, fingers bloodied, clothes torn, but alive. The raiders, slowed and disoriented by the wind, had not yet seen me. I had a narrow window to move into cover, to escape, to survive another day. The storm was both enemy and shield, hiding me even as it threatened to destroy the sanctuary I had found. It was here, at the apex of exhaustion and fear, that clarity struck. Survival was no longer about scavenging scraps, rationing water, or avoiding predators. Survival was about choices, the calculated decisions to risk, to move, to act when hesitation could mean death. And it was about purpose. The sanctuary was more than water and shelter. It was proof that the world still held pockets of life, that hope was not entirely extinguished. But to preserve it, I would have to act decisively, balancing immediate survival with long-term vision. I descended into cover, keeping low, moving silently through the ruins of a burned settlement that the storm had spared partially. My mind catalogued every detail: wind direction, potential ambush points, escape routes, the location of supplies I might scavenge on the way. Survival was a living puzzle, and the pieces were shifting constantly. I felt the weight of every choice, the lives of hypothetical others who might one day follow, and the fragility of the sanctuary behind me. Hours passed like days. The storm raged, the raiders struggled, and I waited, hidden and patient. When the wind finally began to abate, I moved cautiously, returning to the canyon rim to observe. The water glimmered through the thinning haze, a small promise in a brutal world. I allowed myself a brief smile, fleeting but genuine. I had found what I had been seeking. The climax of my journey, the turning point, was not a triumphant arrival, but a delicate balance of survival, courage, and calculated risk. I sat for a moment, reflecting. The choices I had made, moving through hostile terrain, trusting my instincts, risking my life in the storm, were all part of a narrative that had carried me from mere endurance to a confrontation with possibility. I realized that survival was not static. It was a dynamic struggle, defined by courage, observation, and the willingness to act when hesitation could mean nothing less than death. The sanctuary, pure and alive, was real. And yet, I understood it would not remain untouched, that human greed, natural chaos, and environmental volatility would continue to test it. My choice was now clear: preserve the knowledge of its location, ensure access to water, and begin planning for the future, not just my survival, but the survival of anyone else who might find this place. The turning point was not an end point. It was the bridge between survival and something more, a fragile, dangerous, precious possibility. As night fell, the stars obscured by the retreating dust, I allowed myself to drink again from the river. The water was cold, life-affirming, a moment of relief in the relentless tension of the past weeks. I reflected on the journey, the scarcity, the dangers, the human encounters, the storm, and recognized that the true turning point was not the discovery of the sanctuary alone, but my reckoning with what it meant to survive with intention. Survival without purpose is endurance. Survival with purpose becomes defiance. The storm had passed, the raiders dispersed, and I was alone with the water, the trees, and the faint whisper of wind through the canyon. I had faced the climax, the moment where risk, danger, and hope collided and emerged alive. The world beyond the sanctuary remained chaotic, hostile, and unforgiving, but for the first time in years, I felt the weight of possibility. The turning point was not a miracle. It was a choice, hard won, earned through caution, courage. The storm receded slowly, leaving behind a landscape carved by wind and fire. I emerged from the canyon, body stiff, muscles still trembling from the exertion and fear of the climb. The river, my sanctuary, shimmered in the weak afternoon light, a thin mirror reflecting the battered sky. I knelt by the edge again, cupping the cold water in my hands, letting it flow over my palms, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. The danger had passed. At least for now, I had survived. That much was certain. But survival had its cost. My arms bore fresh scrapes. My legs were bruised from slips and miscalculations, and my back ached from the relentless climb and the weight of the small cache of supplies I carried. Hunger was still present, but it had become a background hum, softened by the relief of finding the water source. My stomach grumbled, yet I hesitated to eat the few remaining rations too quickly. Every resource here, every drop of water, every bit of preserved food was precious, and the landscape beyond the canyon was still uncertain, still hostile. The raiders were gone, or at least I could not see them. Their absence did not reassure me. Humans were unpredictable, and desperation made for dangerous company. I could not afford to assume safety. My first decision, after the immediate danger, was one of strategy. I needed to observe, catalogue, and understand the sanctuary. Could it sustain more than one person? Could it support a small community? Was it hidden enough to remain a safe haven? Or would it become a beacon for those willing to take it by force? These questions occupied my mind even as I drank deeply, letting the water revive me. The canyon itself was remarkable. Small trees, young but resilient, grew along the banks of the river, their roots anchoring in soil that seemed almost miraculous after years of drought. Grasses clung stubbornly to the banks, bright green against the rust and grey of the surrounding wasteland. Birds, real, living birds, flew between branches, cautious but persistent, their calls echoing through the narrow walls. Life persisted, here, against the odds, and the realization struck me with the weight of a revelation. The world was not entirely lost. Somewhere, beyond the dust, beyond the fire, Beyond the endless stretch of cracked earth, pockets of vitality remained. I had found one. I sat by the river, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Weeks of scavenging, rationing, moving from one hostile environment to another, each day a calculation of survival versus risk, had all led to this moment. I had risked everything: the storm, the raiders, the sheer treachery of the terrain, to reach a place that might offer more than mere endurance. I allowed myself to remember my losses too. The family I had once known, the friends who had disappeared or been taken, the cities that were now little more than memory. Loss had been my companion for so long that it was almost comforting in its predictability. Yet here, in this fragile sanctuary, hope whispered back. I took stock of my supplies and the immediate needs for sustaining life here. The river could provide water indefinitely if protected, and the small grove of trees offered fruit, albeit limited. I could fashion tools to trap or fish, and the vegetation might conceal a rudimentary shelter from the elements. Fuel, still scarce, would limit electricity for communication, but even without power, I could survive. I began to think of long-term strategies, cultivating the land, creating storage for water, mapping routes for scouting parties, and setting traps for both prey and potential human threats. The sanctuary could be more than a temporary refuge. It could become the foundation for something more lasting. Yet with hope came responsibility. The knowledge that such a place existed meant I could not simply enjoy it in isolation. Others too were searching, and survival is rarely a solitary affair. I began planning protocols for contact, for trade, and for defense. Trust would be a necessary but dangerous component. Some might share my vision, others might seek to dominate it. Every decision required careful thought. Each choice could ensure life or invite destruction. I realized then that survival was no longer just about me. It was about preserving a fragment of the world for those who might come after, or those who might still need it. I spent hours exploring the canyon, each step revealing new aspects of the ecosystem. Small pools branched off from the main river, hidden under rock ledges, some clear and still, others murky but alive with tadpoles and insects. Birds nested in the canyon walls, and tiny mammals darted through the undergrowth. Each sign of life was a confirmation of the delicate balance that allowed this place to endure. I recorded observations, sketches, and notes, realizing that knowledge itself was a form of survival. Understanding the rhythms of water, the behavior of wildlife, and the changes in the microclimate was crucial to ensuring that this sanctuary remained viable. Night fell, and with it came an eerie stillness. The storm had cleared the air, leaving the sky a dark velvet sprinkled with stars, though the orange haze of distant fires lingered faintly on the horizon. I built a small fire, carefully contained, both for warmth and for signaling if needed, but also to remind myself of the simple act of being human. The crackle of flames, the smell of burning wood, the warmth against my chilled skin. These were small reminders that life, even fragile, persisted. I allowed myself to eat, to rest, to reflect. The tension of the past days eased slightly, replaced by the sobering awareness that survival, even here, would require constant vigilance. Sleep came in fits, light and restless. Dreams were filled with dust, fire, and faces I could no longer name, reminders of the chaos that had defined the world for so long. Yet even in dreams, the river remained, a constant, a sanctuary, a possibility. I woke to the sun filtering through the canyon walls, illuminating the water in a prism of light, and I felt a quiet determination settle over me. This place, fragile and beautiful, demanded stewardship. It demanded courage, patience, and perseverance, and it demanded hope. Over the next days, I began to implement small systems. I fashioned barriers to prevent erosion along the riverbank, constructed simple traps for food, and mapped escape routes should the raiders or other threats return. The work was exhausting, but purposeful. Each task reinforced the realization But survival was not static. It required constant adaptation, learning, and action. In tending to this sanctuary, I was not only preserving my own life, but also investing in the possibility of future lives, of future hope, in a world otherwise dominated by decay. I also reflected on the psychological toll of the journey. Isolation, fear, and constant vigilance had shaped me, hardened me, but they had also clarified what mattered. Hope, even fragile, could redefine existence. Survival alone is a hollow victory. To survive without hope is merely enduring. Here, I had found a reason to act, to dream, and to preserve. The sanctuary was proof that the world still offered opportunity, that life could persist despite devastation, and that my choices could influence outcomes beyond immediate survival. The environment, while battered and scarred, showed signs of recovery in this microcosm. The river nourished its banks, trees, spread roots, and the occasional rainfall, however rare, replenished pools and crevices. It was not a return to the world as it had been, but a beginning. Nature, resilient as it was, could heal in fragments, and my role, however small, was to protect and nurture those fragments. Each day, I witnessed new shoots, small animals venturing closer to the water, and the delicate balance of predator and prey resuming. It was a reminder that even amidst collapse, life was stubbornly persistent. Reflection became a daily ritual. I considered the choices I had made, trusting rumors, taking risks through storms, confronting dangers both human and natural, and realized that courage and calculation had both been essential. Fear had been constant, but so had determination. I thought of the people I had passed, the families I had observed, the raiders I had evaded. All of it had led to this place, this river, this fragile sanctuary that could be a seed for rebuilding, however modest. As I sit by the water now, cataloguing observations, rationing supplies, and tending to the small acts of survival, I recognize the transformation within myself. The desperation that had dominated my life has been tempered by purpose. The isolation, while still profound, is now a choice, a guardian's solitude rather than a victim's exile. Hope, however tenuous, shapes every decision. I no longer move merely to endure. I move to preserve, to cultivate, and to protect the possibility of life. The falling action is quiet but potent. The storm has passed. The raiders are gone, at least for now. The river flows, the trees persist, and I remain alive. My body is battered, my supplies limited, but my resolve is strengthened. Survival has shifted from mere existence to conscious stewardship, from fleeting endurance to intentional action, and within that shift, I find something more profound than water, food, or shelter. I find the fragile pulse of hope, beating steadily in a world otherwise defined by chaos. I do not know what the future holds. The wasteland beyond the canyon remains dangerous, unpredictable, and often deadly. Human threats, environmental hazards, and scarcity will continue. But within this sanctuary, I have found proof that life can endure, that hope can survive, and that deliberate choices can create pockets of stability. The aftermath of the climax is not resolution, it is preparation, reflection, and cautious optimism. I stand at the river's edge, watching the sunlight glint off ripples in the water, and I acknowledge that while the world is not healed, I have found a foothold in the chaos. Each breath I take, each movement I make, is a testament to endurance shaped by purpose. The falling action is not a return to safety, but a transition, a bridge between the raw terror of survival and the deliberate cultivation of hope. This place, fragile and beautiful, is a reminder that even in a world scarred beyond recognition, life persists. And as long as I protect it, as long as I continue to act with intention, that persistence can endure. The aftermath is quiet, reflective, and tentative, but it is alive. And alive is enough, for now. This section resolves the immediate dangers. From the climax, shows Ezra's growth and reflection, highlights environmental recovery on a micro level, and reinforces the emerging theme of fragile hope and stewardship. The night falls differently now, quieter than I remember from the years of chaos. There is no hum of traffic, no distant sirens, no endless scrape of tires across cracked pavement. Only the river winding through the canyon, whispering secrets of persistence. I sit beside it, listening to the water trickle over stones. And for a fleeting moment, I allow myself to believe in something fragile. Hope. Not the bold, brash kind that storms in with promises of salvation, but a soft, tenacious pulse beneath the dust, beneath the ruin, beneath the fear. I reflect on the journey that brought me here. Weeks spent scavenging, running, hiding, days filled with the constant calculus of risk, nights haunted by the emptiness of abandoned cities, and the faces of those lost to hunger, fire, and despair. I think of the raiders, of other survivors I never met, of towns that once thrived and now only exist as echoes in the wind. Every step I took was measured against survival, yet each decision carried weight beyond life and death. Choices shaped, not only the day I lived, but the fragile thread of possibility that stretches into tomorrow. The sanctuary I discovered is not a paradise. It is a place of potential, of quiet life in a landscape otherwise defined by death. The river flows, sustaining the sparse grove of trees and the occasional wildlife. The land here breathes slowly, cautiously, as if aware of the danger beyond its walls. I have begun to nurture it. Small acts, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. I clear debris, reinforce banks, catalogue flora and fauna, and mark escape routes. Each action is both a protection and a promise. Life can endure if someone cares enough to ensure it, yet hope is fragile. I cannot ignore the wasteland beyond the canyon, where dust storms rage and humans driven by hunger and desperation roam freely. Raiders may return. Disease and hunger will persist. The world outside does not pause for my sanctuary. It does not respect boundaries or morality. Survival is not a single victory, but an ongoing negotiation with chaos. I know this truth intimately, and it humbles me even as it steels me. I am not victorious. I am merely the temporary steward of life that refuses to die. There are nights when doubt creeps in, silent and insidious. The canyon walls feel like a fragile cage, and I wonder if my solitude is safety or exile. I recall the families, friends, and strangers who perished, and I feel the weight of their absence. But even in these moments, I remind myself, the river flows, the trees grow, and the creatures of this small ecosystem persist. Life, even in its most vulnerable form, is resilient. And if life persists here, perhaps it can persist elsewhere. Perhaps others, if they survive the wasteland, can find fragments of sanctuary too. I have learned that survival is not simply living from sunrise to sunset. Survival is planning, observing, and protecting. It is the recognition that every resource, every drop of water, every patch of soil, carries significance far beyond immediate consumption. It is patience, restraint, and foresight. And most importantly, survival is choice, the conscious decision to act, even when fear and exhaustion scream otherwise. This lesson, learned at the edge of storms and cliffs, carries with it a quiet dignity. I write these thoughts into a small journal, a record for myself, perhaps for others if they come. My words are not declarations of triumph, but careful observations, instructions, and reflections. If someone ever finds this place, they should know what to respect, how to sustain it, and what dangers lurk. Knowledge becomes a form of survival, wisdom a shield, and perhaps in this, hope extends beyond the moment. It reaches forward, tethering possibility to an uncertain future. The canyon is still, the river sings, and I'm alone, but not lonely. Solitude has a sharp edge, but it also allows me to understand my limits and my purpose. I think of the world beyond the walls of this fragile refuge, the dust and fire, the cities that have crumbled into skeletons of memory. And yet, I no longer dwell solely on loss. I focus on what endures, on the act of stewardship itself. I have water, I have food, I have life. It is enough to keep going, if only for today. I watch the stars emerge, piercing the canopy of night. They are faint, scattered through the residual haze of the dust storms, but they exist. Each one feels like a signal, a reminder that beyond chaos, beyond destruction, light can persist. My gaze lingers on them, and I make a quiet vow. I will continue. I will protect this sanctuary, nourish what life exists, and remain vigilant. I do not promise myself permanence or safety, only intention and effort. That is all any of us can truly claim. Hope, I realize, is not a grand revelation, but a choice. A deliberate act of seeing possibility where others might only see ruin. It is the decision to cultivate, to preserve, to act despite fear. In the canyon, surrounded by water and trees, I understand that hope is not naive. It is courage distilled into small, sustained actions. And if I am courageous in these small ways, perhaps the spark can endure beyond me. Perhaps others someday will find it and carry it forward. I take one last drink from the river before settling into rest, letting the water cool my parched throat and anchor me to this moment. I think of tomorrow, uncertain and unkind, and I accept it without resignation. Survival will demand action again, choices that balance risk with necessity. But tonight, I rest with the knowledge that I have endured, that I have discovered a fragment of life, and that in doing so, I have preserved the possibility of more than mere existence. The world may still be broken, scarred, and dangerous. Dust storms will rage, hunger will persist, and humans will continue to test the boundaries of desperation. Yet I have learned that fragments of life, however small, are worth protecting. One river, one grove, one moment of triumph in a wasteland is enough to remind us why we fight, why we endure, and why hope, even fragile, is invaluable. So, to anyone who listens, if the wind carries my voice, or the pages of this journal ever reach a hand beyond this canyon, survive. Protect what you can. Trust, but wisely. Choose hope, even when it trembles in the wind. There is life left in the world, even if it is hidden, even if it is tenuous. It is enough to keep moving, to keep living, to keep believing that tomorrow can be different. I do not know what tomorrow holds. The wasteland beyond this canyon remains unpredictable, harsh, and unforgiving. But for now, I have water, shelter, and the pulse of life that persists here. I have hope, fragile and cautious, yet undeniably present. I have a purpose, and as long as I breathe, I will act, protect, and endure. Stay alive. Guard what matters. Fight, even when the world seems lost. For as long as we persist, even in the smallest acts, hope endures.